Living 5 miles from Florida's Atlantic coast means salt air bleeds into everything. The sun-bleached siding of our house, peeling like sunburned skin. The tangled mangroves framing the tidal creek behind our property. Their roots clutching at briny mud like arthritic fingers. Even the ice cubes in our freezer taste faintly of the ocean, as if the sea had seeped into the tap water while we weren't looking. Dad's 27-foot center console, the salty Serenity, might as well be a fourth family member. Her hull is pocked with barnacle scars, her vinyl seats cracked like desert earth. But Dad polishes her twice a week with the devotion of a priest tending to an altar. Come June, when the pavement starts sweating by 9 a.m., leaving the backyard asphalt shimmering like a mirage, our weekend routines shift. No more strolling Cocoa Beach at sunset, the sand cool and sugared between our toes. No more road trips to Georgia's mountains where the air smells of pine resin instead of decayed jellyfish. Just the Serenity, cutting through Mosquito Lagoon's tea-dark water. Her twin outboards growling as Dad grins into the wind like a kid gripping a roller coaster bar. His baseball cap flipped backwards so the brim doesn't snap off in the gale. That Friday in July clung to us like wet gauze, the kind they'd press over a wound to staunch bleeding. Humidity hung pregnant over the intracoastal, thickening the air until dragonflies moved through it like swimmers fighting a riptide. The dock's wooden planks wept beads of condensation, and the rope lines sagged, limp as dead eels. Cicadas screamed in the palmettos, their drone rising and falling like a theremin's whine. Mom hovered in the kitchen doorway, her knuckles white around a ginger ale can. Her seasick armor, she called it, though we all knew the cure wasn't working today. The aluminum dented under her grip, droplets sliding down the sides to pool on the linoleum. She'd worn that same wilted smile when Dad announced the trip, her eyes tracking the Serenity's keys as they jingled in his hand. "Y'all go," she said too quickly, her voice fraying at the edges. "I'll defrost the controverters for when you're back." The freezer hummed in agreement, exhaling a plume of frost as she opened it. Dad didn't need persuading. He was already halfway to the dock, his flip-flops slapping against the warped boards, shouting over his shoulder about a new sandbar he'd spotted near the Spoil Islands. "Gonna be glassy out there." Glassy meant flat water, which meant he'd open the throttle wide, let the boat fly until the bow lifted and the world blurred into seagrass and sky, the horizon line trembling like a plucked guitar string. I hesitated, watching Mom press the cold can to her forehead, her eyelids fluttering as condensation trickled down her temple. She shooed me off with a flick of her dish towel, a faded thing patterned with lobsters and anchor knots, but not before I caught the way her gaze snagged on the horizon. Not wary, but hungry, as if she was staring at a ghost ship only she could see. Its sails full of the same winds that used to fill her lungs when she'd race Dad to the channel markers, back when her stomach didn't turn at the smell of diesel in low tide. The salty Serenity sliced into the bay, her cooler packed with Dad's lime-flavored seltzers, cans slick with condensation, their tabs hissing like tiny airlocks, and my mason jar of lemonade, still pulpy with rind the way Mom insists on making it, the bitterness clinging to the back of the throat like a secret. Mosquito Lagoon hummed with July's feverish energy. Jet skis zigzagged like water striders, their wakes crisscrossing into lace, while toddlers shrieked as mullet leapt silver arcs over their inflatable rafts, their scales catching the light like flung nickels. From Sharky's shack, its roof patched with license plates and fishnets sagging with plastic crabs, the tinny thump of Zac Brown band covers drifted across the water, the chorus of knee-deep wearing with the guttural croak of bullfrogs in the sawgrass. Dad docked at their warped pier with a captain's flourish, the Serenity's hull kissing the pilings with a groan, and tossed the rope to a sunburnt teenager whose shoulders blistered tomato red beneath peeling tattoos of anchor ink. The kid nodded like they had rehearsed this 100 times, his bare feet gripping the splintered wood with the ease of someone who'd never known shoes. Time dissolved. We ate blackened mahi tacos that burned our tongues, the charred edges crumbling into our laps, their heat cut by dollops of mango salsa, so bright it tasted like summer itself. We laughed as pelicans dive-bombed for our discarded lime wedges, their beaks snapping shut with a sound like castanets, wings grazing the water's surface as if testing its temperature. The sun melted us into the vinyl seats, the material sticking to our thighs like warm glue, until dusk arrived unannounced. The horizon bled tangerine and violet, the water reflecting the sky's fire like spilled gasoline, iridescent and dangerous. Dad raised his last seltzer in salute, condensation dripping onto his wristwatch. "Tonight's that outshine days," he said, his voice roughened by salt and sun, and I clinked my lemonade against his can, the glass ringing hollow. I didn't yet notice how his toast sounded like a warning, how his eyes lingered a beat too long on the darkening east, where the first stars pricked through the bruise-colored sky. Darkness fell with the finality of a theater curtain, the last daylight snuffed out behind the spoiled islands. Dad queued up his night cruising playlist. Springsteen's Growl, Seeger's Gravel Road Rasp, that one CCR song he swears every boat needs, and cranked the volume until the bass vibrated in my molars, the speakers buzzing like hornets in a jar. We glided into the unlit stretch beyond the channel markers, where the lagoon widens into a black mirror, the mangroves reduced to jagged cutouts against the moonless sky. The Serenity's running lights painted emerald ripples on the water, their glow dissolving inches below the surface, as if the lagoon drank the light whole. The air turned crisp, carrying the sweetness of night-blooming jasmine, thick as syrup, tangled with something sharper, metallic, like a penny held on the tongue. It clung to the back of the throat, a taste that wasn't quite a taste, as the boat pushed farther into the void. The only sounds the churn of the engines and the occasional slap of a mullet fleeing our wake. We passed near a lighthouse, a skeletal sentinel perched on Ponce Inlet's crumbling jetty, its iron ribs exposed where storms had gnawed through limestone flesh, its beams sliced through the dark every 10 seconds. A staccato swish that lit the foam around us in stark, clinical white, bleaching the color from Dad's face and my trembling hands. Shadows leapt and contorted in its glare. Seaweed became grasping fingers, drifting logs arched like the spines of drowned creatures. The light's pulse throbbed in time with my heartbeat, each pass leaving after images burned into my retinas. I gripped the console, the fiberglass edge biting into my palm, That thing's straight out of a Stephen King novel, I said, too loud, my voice cracking like the gulls screeching overhead. Dad smirked, his face half lit by the GPS screen's ghostly green glow, the other half drowned in shadow. Built in 1887, he said, as if reciting a psalm. Back when this inlet ate ships for breakfast. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, the leather wrap creaking. Your great-granddad used to supply the keepers. Said they'd trade whiskey for snapper. Fresh snapper, not that freezer-burnt crap. He nudged me, his calloused hand rough on my shoulder, the salt-stiffened fabric of his shirt scraping my neck. Relax, kid. Only ghosts out here are the ones we bring with us. His laugh was a dry thing, lost to the growl of the engine, but his thumb tapped the throttle twice, quick and restless. The beam swept over us again. For a heartbeat, the lighthouse's brickwork seemed to ripple, its mortar oozing black as crude oil, rivulets crawling downward like veins. Then darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the aftertaste of that image, a wet, glistening rot. I blinked, but the tower stood inert again, its cracks and fissures frozen in the brief glare. The air smelled different here, the usual brine undercut by a dankness, like the inside of a storm drain after a flood. Dad killed the engine. The salty Serenity's hum died abruptly, leaving a vacuum of sound so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the click-click of cooling metal from the outboards. The boat swayed, creaking like an old floorboard as waves lapped at the hull with wet, open-mouthed kisses. My skin prickled, goose flesh rising despite the humidity. I couldn't stop staring at the lighthouse. Its beam carved the dark into fragments, each pass illuminating the tower's peeling paint, its rusted railing clawing at the sky. It looked less like a guide now, and more like a bone jutting from a grave. Something the earth had tried to bury but couldn't quite keep down. Dad rummaged in the cooler for another seltzer, the crack hiss of the tab deafening. Trust the process, he muttered, though I couldn't tell if he was talking to me or the night itself. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the sound at first. Not over Springsteen's growl bleeding from the speakers. Not over the Serenity's hull slapping the waves like a restless heartbeat. Then it came again. A scream. Not a distant whoop of a drunk tourist, or the theatrical shriek of a gull, but a raw, guttural sound. The kind that shreds vocal cords, that belongs to animals caught in steel traps. It cut through the bass line, sharp as a fillet knife. Dad, kill the music. I lunged for the stereo, slapping at the volume knob, my palm slipping in its sweet, slick plastic. He flinched, his sunburned face slack with confusion, the pink peeling skin around his eyes crinkling like tissue paper. The speakers went silent. The quiet that followed was suffocating. A wool blanket pressed over the world, smothering even the lap of waves against the hull. Someone's out there, I whispered. My throat tightened, every hair on my arm standing rigid as porcupine quills. Dad's grin from earlier had vanished. He gripped the wheel, his knuckles bleached white as barnacle shells, as the scream came again. Closer this time, or maybe the water carried it sharper. honed by the lagoon's curved throat. A woman's voice, fraying into a sob, skated across the black water. My eyes found the island, a jagged smudge in the moonlight, half swallowed by mist that coiled like smoke from a doused fire. No boats, no lights, just that jagged silhouette, its shoreline clawed by currents that could capsize a kayak in seconds, that could drag you down to where the crabs pick bones clean. We didn't move, didn't breathe. The Serenity rocked gently, mocking the stillness, her hull creaking like a taunt. I counted the seconds. 10, 20, 40. Nothing. The lagoon stretched empty, a black sheet ironed flat, its surface oily and unbroken. No life jacket bobbed in the swells. No hands broke the surface, fingers splayed like starfish. Only the island, hunched and silent. A place where the water itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to exhale its secrets.
Help!
The cry tore through the night, brittle and fractured, the valves splintering. Dad fumbled for the spotlight, its beam quaking as he swept it over the water, the light catching the iridescent swirl of baitfish fleeing from unseen predators. The islands loomed, all jagged coral teeth and spindly sea grape trees, their leaves glinting like knife edges in the stark white glare. "Where are you?" we shouted in unison, our voices thin against the vastness, swallowed by the dark as if the lagoon had no bottom, no end.
Being followed?
The reply screamed. Followed? My mind snagged on the word. "Are you on the island?" Dad barked, louder now, the spotlight jerking across the shore, illuminating skeletal driftwood and shadows that twitched like living things. Her answer was a scream, a serrated, sustained note that raised the flesh on my neck, that left my eardrums throbbing.
Yes!
Dad didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life, a feral sound that scattered the quiet, the sudden violence of it sending a cormorant busting from the reeds in a panic of wings. The Serenity lurched forward, bow slamming into waves as we charged the island, the hull shuddering like it might splinter. The cliffs reared up, pitted limestone glowing bone-white in the spotlight, pockmarks gaping like eye sockets. Dad anchored 20 yards out, the chain grating against rock as breakers hissed, hungry against the hull, their foam glowing faintly like bioluminescent algae, tiny blue sparks dying as they struck the boat. Up close, the island was a feral thing. Seaweed clung to its rocks like matted hair, reeking of rot and brine. The trees leaned at cruel angles, roots exposed like tendons, their bark sloughing off in leprous patches. No footprints marked the narrow beach. No torn fabric fluttered in the branches. Just wind hissing through sawgrass, a low, wet sound, like the island itself was breathing. We pulled on the boots Dad had stashed in the Serenity's compartment, stiff rubber reeking of mildew, soles treadless as dolphin skin. Climbing out shirtless, the rocks bit into my palms, sharp as crab claws, while the boots slipped on algae-slick stone, each step a gamble. Dad's flashlight beam juddered ahead, a frail yellow circle that deepened the darkness around us, the shadows pooling like spilled ink. "Call out!" he demanded, his voice cracking. The beam swept over gnarled trunks, over tide pools glinting like 1,000 watching eyes, their surfaces trembling with the scuttle of translucent shrimp. No one answered. The chill that crept up my spine wasn't the night's doing. It slithered, serpentine between my ribs. "She could be injured," I said, the words crumbling as they left my lips, dissolving like sand in a receding wave. "Or trapped." Dad's jaw tightened, the tendon flickering like a fishing line under strain. He swung the flashlight beam inland, its light fraying at the edges as it cut through the undergrowth, exposing spider webs strung between sea grape leaves, their silk glinting like nooses. We moved in tandem, boots crunching over shells and driftwood, shouting, "Hello?" into the void. Each call dissolved into the wind, unanswered. The island drinking our voices whole. The ground squelched beneath us, sodden with tidal muck that reeked of sulfur and spoiled eggs. Deeper in, the air turned cloying. Salt rot and wet limestone, the stench of something decaying beneath the soil. Something too large to name. Mangroves crowded us, their roots knuckling up from the ground like buried skeletons, the bark sloughing off in papery strips. "Can you hear us?" Dad bellowed. The cliffs threw his voice back, warped and watery, as if the island itself were taunting us, mocking our futility. Above, night herons croaked their disapproval, weak snapping through the canopy like wet canvas tearing. The sea hissed, a relentless audience to our search, its rhythm syncopated with the ragged tempo of our breathing. Then, a guttural, choked scream. Not distant, close. Human but strangled, half swallowed, as if the mouth that made it were stuffed with kelp. The sound hit me like a live wire to the ribs, my muscles seizing. Dad froze, the flashlight trembling in his grip, the beam skittering over roots that now looked like coiled snakes. No words passed between us. We ran. The island fought us. Sawgrass lashed my forearms, drawing blood that welled back in the moonlight. Sand spurs clung to my jeans, their barbs needle sharp, and the boots skidded on moss-slick rocks, each misstep threatening to twist an ankle. Dad's flashlight beam juddered wildly, carving grotesque shadows from the trees. A hunched figure here, a reaching hand there, all vanishing as the light swept past. My lungs burned, salt and iron coating my tongue. The scream looped in my skull, primal, wrong, propelling me forward, even as the terrain turned jagged, cruel, the ground buckling into fissures choked with sea wrack. I stumbled onto the eastern shore, heaving for air, the beam flitting over the tide pools alive with scuttling crabs, over boulders crusted with barnacles that yawned like tiny mouths. Nothing. No crumpled form in the surf, no footprints in the muck. Just the moon staring down, cold and dispassionate. And the silence. That silence. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and smug, as if the island had swallowed the woman whole and now licked its lips, sated. Dad caught up, sweat gleaming on his temples like mercury, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth, to curse, to rationalize, but no sound came. The flashlight's beam shrank dimming as if the darkness itself were leeching its power, the batteries draining into the hungry earth. We stood gasping, the screams echo still thrashing in our skulls. Had we imagined this whole thing? The thought slithered, cold and unwelcome. Around us the mangroves swayed, though the air hung motionless, their roots creaking like arthritic joints. My flashlight trembled as I swung it toward the shore, the plastic casing creaking in my white-knuckled grip. The beam carved a trembling path through the dark, scattering shadows like roaches fleeing a struck match. The light caught on strands of seaweed dangling from mangrove branches. Their tendrils swaying through the air hung utterly still. And there, where the surf gnawed at the rocks, foam hissing between jagged teeth, it stood. Not human, not animal, a thing of angles and voids, its silhouette a mockery of anatomy, as if a sculptor had assembled bones at random and called it done. Moonlight glazed its emaciated frame, ribs like scythes curving inward, joints knotted and inverted, legs spiraled as if wrung by giant hands. Its skin, if it was skin, glistened wetly, reflecting the beam in oily streaks, the surface ripping like mercury disturbed by a fingertip. The head lolled backward, neck tendons straining like ship's rigging as it stared into the moon's glare with eyeless eyes, pupilless voids that swallowed the light whole. Then, slowly, wrongly, it pivoted towards us. The movement was liquid, boneless, its spine undulating like a sea whip caught in a riptide. The flashlight caught its face, a collapsed star of features, eyes like pulled mercury, swirling with refractured moonlight. A mouth too small, too precise, a razor-cut slit that peeled open, cartilage crackling like crumpled cellophane as it spoke.
You found me.
The voice was a flawless mimicry of the woman's. Her panic, her pitch, but warped, as if played through waterlogged speakers. It didn't resonate. It slithered, bypassing the ears to coil directly in the gut, cold and invasive as a swallowed eel. My knees buckled. Dad's grip locked onto my bicep, fingers vice tight, his nails biting crescents into my skin. Run! No hesitation, no questions. We fled, boots skidding on kelp-slimed rocks, the thing's cries chasing us, sharpening with each step.
Help me!
It wailed, each syllable fraying at the edges now, unraveling into something guttural, wetter, the sound of a throat filling with seawater.
Help me!
The words splintered, layered with clicks and hisses, a chorus of corrupted voices overlapping, as if a dozen throats had been fused and torn apart. My spine seized, a primal recognition, older than language. This wasn't fear. This was prey knowledge. The hare's certainty that the fox's teeth are already at its neck, that the chase is just ritual. We didn't look back, didn't dare. The island's undergrowth tore at our clothes, thorns biting into wrists, sand spurs embedding in our ankles like fishhooks. Dad's breath sawed in his throat, raw and rhythmic. each gasp flavored with salt and copper. The Serenity's running lights glowed ahead, bobbing on the black water like a mirage, the boat's hull groaning as waves slammed it against the anchor. Behind us, the cries mutated. Less words now, more vibration. A subsonic hum that made my molars ache and my vision blur. I risked one glance. The thing stood at the tree line, its body contorted into a crouch. Arms elongated, fingers splayed like mangrove roots, tips tapering into hooked spines. It didn't pursue, just watched, head cocked at an impossible angle, as if savoring the taste of our terror. Its mouth stretched into a crescent slit that might have been a smile. Or a promise. We spilled into the salty Serenity like men fleeing a grenade blast, limbs tangling, boots scuffing the deck's non-slip tread raw. Dad clawed at the anchor line, his fingers slipping on the wet rope, the fibers groaning as if the sea itself fought to keep us tethered. When the anchor finally broke free, its surface caked in black sludge that reeked of low-tide rot, the clumps dripping like congealed blood, strands of seagrass tangled in the flukes like hair. Dad jammed the throttle forward. The engine screamed, a feral sound that drowns the island's silence. The RPM needle trembling in the red as foam boiled beneath the stern. Water churned behind us, the wake glowing faintly with bioluminescent algae, a ghostly trail that pulsed as we raced toward open water. The blue-green sparks swirling into shapes that might have been faces or hands. I gripped the gunwale, refusing to look back. But the thing's voice pursued us, crisp as a gunshot across the waves, its timbre flawless, inhumanly precise.
Come back!
It shrieked, its tone now slick, almost musical, a lullaby wrapped in razor wire.
I need help!
The words slithered into my ears, stripped of their earlier desperation, each vowel polished to a predatory gleam. This wasn't a plea. It was a performance, a pantomime of distress laced with a giddy, venomous edge. The sound of a child's music box cranked too fast, its melody warping into dissonance. What we encountered that night defies logic. If you're reading this, if you're skimming Florida's barrier islands at dusk, cocktails in hand, laughter spilling over the rails like something the night can't wait to devour, heed this. When the wind carries a cry from some lonely spit of sand, when your gut knots at the too perfect pitch of that, help me, do not answer. Steer clear. Flood the engine. Pray the current drags you anywhere else. Pray harder. Because whatever wears a human voice like ill-fitting skin, whatever peels back the night to show you teeth masquerading as a smile, it isn't lost. It doesn't want help. It wants you. Alive. Bleeding. Afraid.